Welcome everybody. I'm here with Neal, Gnostic Informant, and how you doing today, man?
Good, man. I'm just excited to come on your show. You're one of my go-tos for a lot of the topics you discuss.
Awesome. Same with you. And I guess to introduce the topic, anyone who's been following the channel probably knows what I've been talking about recently. But just to kind of describe how I got into this, I was looking into Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's idea of the demonic, and that led me down some rabbit holes because, when looking for the origins of him using that idea. He's influenced by Spinoza, but he's also influenced by these German romanticists like Herder and Hamann, who use the term demonic or demon in a positive sense. Probably for the first time in a long time in Europe that people are using the term
Yeah.
demonic in a positive sense. And but that's Germany, late 1700s, 1800s. They call it the tyranny of Greece over Germany. The Hellenism is just in the oxygen. Everyone's all about the Hellenic world. They had some anachronistic ideas about it, but maybe we can cut them some slack. It's the early days of philology and classicism.
Yeah.
Plus, everybody who's drawing inspiration from the ancient world, you're gonna probably be anachronistic to some extent. But in light of that, that kind of reversal of how they're using the term demonic, I wanted to understand where this idea came from, why they're using this Greek word to refer to fallen angels, even in the modern day. And so I reached out to you during this process trying to understand this. You gave me some really helpful sources. That's how I kind of became interested in this. Like, why did the Christians make this connection from the Greek protective spirits essentially to saying, they're fallen angels, they're evil beings? So, I mean, maybe you could kind of go anywhere you want with that, but I was thinking we could maybe start out just talking about the historical context of how the
Yeah.
Greeks saw the daimones, what it originally refers to.
Yes. Lay that out quickly, or not, maybe not quickly, but lay that out first. Is that they're in Greek in the classical sources, going back to Homer, all the way up until late antiquity, there was this sort of differentiation between gods and daimons. Sometimes the words are used interchangeably. Sometimes gods just are daimons. Like Dionysus and Apollo are called the great daimons, and different Orphic and Homeric hymns, they get these epithets of the good daimon or the great daimon, and they're also gods. So that's like, what's the difference? Not really much in some cases, but as time goes on and there starts to be more classifications and people start to take these words more seriously, you start to see this idea that daimons are sort of lesser, maybe not, they're not human, but they're divine figures, but they're not like, completely as high as like Zeus or Plato's good god or the one or whatever. And this becomes kind of popular in middle and Neoplatonism circles, where these daimons are just kind of lesser terrestrial, sometimes celestial figures who are working as intermediaries between the higher divinities and the higher gods, or even the one, if we're talking about Platonism, for which is considered monism. And just to explain monism, it's not the same as monotheism. A lot of people confuse these two.
Hmm.
Monism is a very philosophical idea that has its roots in the pre-Socratics, like Anaxagoras, Heraclitus, Parmenides, these guys. But there's this idea that the cosmos is ruled by like one perfect, all-knowing, demiurgic creator of everything. And underneath this God, sometimes there's a dualistic frameworks going on where there's good and evil. You see that in Persian thought, Zoroastrian circles. Even some of the pre-Socratics had some similar ideas of this as well. But generally, there's one God, one like one mastermind behind the reality we're in right now. And then the gods that Homer and Hesiod are writing about are these beneath. There's like a hierarchy, levels of divinity that eventually makes its way down to humans. And then there's heroes in between that. There's like half demigods that are like, the son of Hercules, and a lot of the Greeks thought that their lineages, and even Romans too, go back to a certain god. Like the Caesar family thought they went back to Venus. The Macedonians thought they went back to Heracles, et cetera, et cetera. So
Right.
there's a hierarchy of divinity that's at play. And the
Oh,
daimons.
and if I
Go
could
ahead.
just say, just briefly, yeah, like you see that, like you mentioned, Anaxagoras, he has like repulsion and attraction, but ultimately has one principle. They're all trying to name the arche, the one principle behind everything. And for him, I think it's mind, or nous is like the
Noose,
one thing.
yes.
And so yeah, it's like there was this long kind of project of trying to find what is the one thing by which we can understand the entire natural world, the entire cosmos. And as you say, eventually it gets to Plato and the idea of the good, which I
Yep.
think eventually leads directly into the Christian God. But that's getting ahead of us
It does. It
a
does.
little
And we
bit.
will get there because the Platonists that are in the Jewish Platonists are the ones bringing these ideas forward, which I'll get to in a second. But as you said, yeah, then they have different names for this. Like Aristotle just calls him the unmoved mover and doesn't
Mm.
really say much about him. It's very vague if he even believes in a sort of this sort of divinity thing. But he does have in several places in Aristotle and especially in his metaphysics, he mentions an unmoved mover who started everything. And I think he says something along the lines of, "You just need to grant me this, and then everything else makes sense." Like it's
Right,
sort
right,
of
right.
just like he just needs this one, and it's they're thinking very rational about this. They're doing like they're. I think some of the Platonists even describe it through math. Proclus was one of these who used mathematics to just to figure out that everything had to come from one source, mathematically proven. I don't know exactly how he gets there, but someone probably knows what I'm talking about. But
Or
anyways,
Pythagoras and the Mathematici, or the
Pythagoras, yeah.
yeah, the idea of like numbers, especially later Pythagoreans, is sort of like the number is the fundamental truth.
Yes, yeah. There's that was the fundamental stuff behind the Pythagorean theology was all numbers and geometry and gematria even in Judaism and Kabbalah circles gets its origins from Pythagoreanism. It's a Greek word, gematria.
Oh,
Comes
interesting.
from the same Greek word that we get geometry from. Because in
Yeah,
I think it's non-Euclidean mathematics where geometry and arithme are the same thing. They're all just one mathematical or one school of math where all numbers are represented by a shape. So you have like a
right.
circle is one, the monad, and then two is what is it, a square or something? Three is a triangle. Four, and then you get into the hexagrams and the pentagrams and all the way up to the oct. You get all these different symbols, but they all represent number. They're all it's mathematics.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, and I was just going to say the way I think about it with the Pythagoreans, because they have this connection with music too, is
yeah,
that yeah, if you look at like think about a string, like a guitar string, and like where you press, like the distance, which it's a geometric consideration, right? Of actual where on the line do you divide it? That produces a different sound, and it's a numerical relation that then produces this phenomenon. So I think it's like a really brilliant theory in a way that
it
actually
is.
reflects a lot of modern ideas about the world.
Yeah, I mean, it eventually spawns different theories of mathematics that we get to modern arithmetic and all this. Like eventually, like we build our knowledges off of these more primitive models of math, and we get to where we're at. But Pythagorean theorem is still used, even though we now know that Pythagoras didn't invent it. We found a Babylonian inscription where it looks exactly like Pythagorean theorem being done. So like they probably adopted this stuff from earlier
Right.
but anyways, monism is this system where let me just mute this. Monism is the system where there's one god on top, and it breaks off into a dyad sometimes, and then that breaks forth into different models of the gods or whatnot. And it doesn't necessarily mean you only worship. Monotheism is you worship one god who you think is the only god, and he has angels and that are intermediaries between this one God, but you only believe one God is worthy of worship. That's monotheism. There's also megatheism, where you have one God who's way more superior than every other God, but he's not like the all it. Like it might be Zeus who you worship, because Zeus right now currently is the king of the cosmos. But there was a time when Saturn ruled. So it doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean Zeus is the all knowing, all perfect. He could get dethroned. Who knows? But right now, Zeus is the man. That's megatheism. And the difference between that and monism is monism says you can be a polytheist still under the monistic system. You just think that there's this perfect, all knowing being on top of everything, but you still honor Aphrodite. You still offer sacrifices to Aphrodite. You still build temples to the gods, like Apollo, and you still worship the gods. You're not a monotheist, but you still believe in a monistic philosophy. So that's the difference. And then so the daimons are messengers. In fact, if I can just pull something up real quick, we have inscriptions. Actually, this one I don't need to show this one. We have inscriptions from Asia Minor, where, and this is from the book One God, Pagan Monotheism in the Roman Empire. It's called. It's a book that was peer reviewed through Exeter University, and it lists a bunch of inscriptions where there in Asia Minor, for example, we have an inscription about these gods that are called messengers. And let me just see if I can find exactly what it says. Yes, so this we have this inscription in Latium. This is in Italy, where Janus is called an angel of Jupiter. He's called a messenger, an angelos of Jupiter. So that's an interesting inscription we found. Another one that I just mentioned before from Asia Minor, where it has these much laboring messengers, polymokthoi angeloi, much laboring angels of Theos Hypsistos. So it's literally God Most High and his messengers. And there's an inscription that reflects this in Asia Minor. There are other inscriptions we found, which, again, Asia Minor, once again, which is interesting because Asia Minor is where Christianity takes off. Right. So the fact that we find this there is very interesting. The inscription of Asia Minor refers to gods who are served as, this one I'll actually show. This one's actually pretty interesting. Share. This is from the same book that I was just mentioning, where it says, "This inscriptions of Asia Minor refer to gods who served as messengers, angeloi, of a superior god." And then going on further, it talks about the Orphic theology knew of angels of superior god as well. There's the same epithet, polymokthoi angeloi, the many working messengers of the higher gods. So these are daimons, though. So the question is, how does that term become something that becomes evil? Well, I think there's some. I mean, I told you this before. I think there's some transitional fossils in between, and the one that I have in mind that I really think needs to be looked at is from Philo of Alexandria, who actually is Jewish himself. And I'll just pull up his text. It's called On Dreams, and he says that he's talking about the philosophers. He talks about the Greeks, and he says these are called demons. Or if you actually look at the Greek right here, I don't know if you can see my can you see my mouse or no?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's daimonos. It's the word daimonos. It doesn't actually just say demons. It says it's translated as demons by this translator, but the word you can see daimonos. Mm-hmm. And he says these daimonos by other philosophers, but the sacred record wants to call them angels or messengers, angeloi. And you can see angelos right there, the word longelos. Messengers, employing an apter title. For both they convey the biddings of the father to his children and report the children's need to their father. This is another part where he says, this is a different book where he kind of, on the giants, where he says something very similar. He says, "It is Moses' custom to give the name of angels to those whom other philosophers call daimons. Souls, that is, which fly and hover in the air." So Philo is not saying they worship demons and our God has angels that serve him. He's actually saying the angels are demons. The daimons are messengers, which would have been the correct way that people would have thought about it in Philo's time. And so...
Yeah, well, because we think of angels and we immediately... like the word association most people have, right? A dude in a white robe with some wings, maybe a sword, maybe a halo, something like that. But really, it has a literal meaning, the messengers.
Yes.
And the way that they're describing, when they're saying that demons are angels, they're saying the daimones of the Greeks, these spirits are their word for the entities that carry they're like an intercessory being. I think about also...
Yep.
Going all the way back to Plato's Symposium, where Socrates makes the argument, paraphrasing the high priestess of the Temple of Eros, according to him, that she says Eros isn't a god, he's a daimon, because... I was
just going to pull that up. Yeah, he calls him a winged daimon, too.
Right, that because he's like Well, the argument that he's advancing is, the gods are all perfect, so they have all the qualities of beauty and goodness already perfectly. And for us mortals, we want those things, and Eros is the spirit that basically relates us to the divine. So if love is the desire for beauty, the divine has the beauty. We're imperfect beings, we're striving for it. So Eros is like this spirit of striving towards the beautiful. It's probably kind of Socrates being anachronistic there for his own purposes, but that's the sense in which he's using it, that Eros is sort of, again, intercessory between the divine and the human world.
Yeah, and so there are, and that's exactly what I was going to. I was just going to point to that too. And he's called. He has an epithet in Longus and the story about Daphne and Chloe, where he's called the winged daimon. The wing. So you get this image of a winged daimon in this first century novel called Daphnis and Chloe, which I think might have had some influence on how people thought of daimons or messengers or angels with his wings and all that stuff. Um, Hermes too. Hermes has like wings on his head, and he's literally called the angelos of Zeus, the messenger of Zeus. That's like one of his direct. That is probably the most direct example of a god being called an angel, going back very far. I think that's even probably Homeric, where Hermes is called the angelos or the angelon of Zeus, which would
Yeah.
be the genitive dios, angelo dios. He's the
Well, and
messenger
like
of Zeus.
with the, I think I was reading Diogenes Laertius talking about Pythagoras, and Pythagoras has this whole story about how he remembers his past lives because he was given that knowledge by, or that power by Hermes. That basically,
Yes.
and but there's this explanation in the text about how Hermes is called the infernal, but he's also called like the winged one or the messenger because he ferries souls all the way up and he takes them down. Like he's sort of like it's like the alchemists would take that and make a huge symbol of it. Is that Mercury or Hermes is always like a sort of transitional figure or indeterminate or a figure of transformation because he goes up to the heavens, he goes down to hell, he
Yes.
goes between earth and all these other spheres of existence.
Exactly. He is the perfect example of what an angel's function is, but not in Judeo-Christian sources, in pagan sources. He's just the guy who moves in between different realms, and he goes up and down between Olympus and Hades and wherever in the Elysium fields, and he can move in between. He's a he can what's psychopomp. And so that is literally what an angel is. An angel is one who goes back and forth between God and humans and relays messages. Hermes did that role as a god. So we know what this all means. This is like setting the context, and then like eventually, and I think a lot of this has to do with like Enoch, with the fallen angels, and back in the days there was the
Can we
fallen
talk
ones.
about that really quick?
Yes,
Because it
yeah,
isn't the Book of Enoch is not, it's not part of the canon.
it's not canonical, but it's
But
not. But
but
that
there's a
doesn't
story in
necessarily.
Genesis, right, that hints at it that is canonical.
Yes, so it is and it isn't canonical. It's canonical as the story is believed by almost all Abrahamic faiths. They all think this happened. That there was a time when fallen gods, fallen daimons came and bred with people on earth, and so some people later on, a lot of Christian theologians, especially like Augustine, thought that these were the gods that because the Greek, the polytheists of their time period, that they call them pagans, the rustic pagans, they believe that their ancestors came from these lines of bloodlines that go back to these gods. Well, that's interesting. That perfectly lines up with our story of Enoch, where the fallen ones, who are called Nephilim, sometimes it's just translated as giants, whatever. The word Nephil in Hebrew means to fall.
Right.
They are the fallen ones, and the fallen ones came down and pick their favorite women and breed with them and gave birth to a race of humans that were like heroes, and this is the age of heroes they call it. And so Greek mythology actually kind of agrees with this. They thought like the titans and the gods were able to have children with humans, and that became the heroes. And some of these like Perseus is one of these heroes. He's half divine, half mortal. Hercules has a mortal mother and a divine divine father, and so forth. So you have these figures who are half divine, half mortal, and they are the progenitors of the Greeks. They are progenitors of all these different families of Greeks and Romans. And so the Christians love this. They're like, yeah, this is exactly what happened. But those are demons. They're false
Right, right,
gods,
right, right.
and they don't obey the will of the one. They don't obey the will of Jesus and his Father. Um, so this idea that they are daimons, but they're not messengers of the one. They're not here to give you the message of Jesus. They're here to do their own thing. They're here to be worshipped. They're here to trick you.
Right.
And
How does this?
Justin Martyr says this too. Go ahead.
Oh, how does this relate with the war in heaven? Do the Christians who believe in the story believe the fallen, like the Nephilim? Like,
Yeah. Oh, this
was
is
it their
directly tied to
cast? They're cast out of heaven, so they came down here and then mated with human women. Is that the account?
Yes, as you pointed out, Enoch is not canonical, but it's directly quoted in the Epistle of Jude, word for word, which means Christians, whoever was writing Jude, thought that this text was canonical. The only reason why it's not canonical is not because Christians hated the book or thought it wasn't true. It's because they couldn't find a legitimate Hebrew version of the text. They only knew about a Greek version, which was a translation, they thought, and there was like Ethiopic versions. So they never included it in the Bible because of its dubious translations that they had. They didn't trust the source. Um, and so that's why it became apocryphal. But they
Right.
always thought the story was correct. They always thought
Well,
of
and
it as part of their history.
you mentioned Justin Martyr a second ago, which I imagine we'll get into in a second.
Mhm.
But it seems to me like, well, I mean, he's writing at a time before there's been an ecumenical council, so there's not like a
Yes.
canon. So
Yes.
it's the whole idea of like, oh, he cites a non-canonical book of the Bible. He wouldn't have even had a concept of that.
Yeah. And so Justin Martyr is a century after Philo. He's obviously influenced by Philo. He's big into the Logos and some of the stuff that Philo writes about. And but he's acknowledging that these gods are real. He's not denying the existence of these gods. In fact, he even acknowledges how similar some of them are to Christ. But what he does is and this is literally the book called Apology. He's literally doing apologetics. This is the father of apologetics. He
Right.
says, "Yeah, all right, guys, look, you're right. Christ and these gods, what we're saying is no different than what you say about Hercules and Dionysus and Apollo and whatnot. And like you say, Perseus is born of a virgin. You say Dionysus was torn apart and raised up again and resurrected. You say that Mithras initiated a Eucharist, that all mankind can be saved, and all this stuff. But what we're saying is no different than that. Sure. However, you were tricked by demons. Ours is real. Yours is a trick. The demons knew about Christ. They knew what was going to happen. So they came here and they instituted these mysteries so that you would be thrown off. And
Right.
so,
When he talks
um,
about how he sort of he like morally attacks their mysteries, basically
yes,
talking about how like, well, the evidence, yeah, you have all these similar myths, but the evidence is, I mean, essentially it's like pleasures of the flesh are being indulged.
yeah.
There's elements of your rights which are provoke disgust or laughter. Like it should
Clement of
all be
Alexandria, Clement of Alexandria does the exact same thing in his book called the Protrepticus, or translated as Exhortation to the Greeks, where you can see he's trying to level with his fellow Greeks, and he's like, yeah, these mysteries are great and all, and I can see that people are being initiated and th're dying with dignity because of the Eleusinian mysteries. Look how great it is. And he's like, but it's all teaching you immoral stuff like orgies, and he's like, put down the orgies and put down the wine and get sober. Instead of singing the song of Orpheus, sing the song of Christ. And he's just
right,
like, he kind of uses this imagery, and then he says, instead of being maenads, become followers of Christ, become disciples. And he's flipping things on its head. So there's this, you start to see a reversal, but Philo has a way different tone. Philo, who's a Jew living in Alexandria, he's not trying to deconvert pagans. He's actually saying positive things about the gods. He writes a letter to the embassy of Gaius, Caligula, and he's he's trying to level with Caligula, who's kind of nasty, a maniac. He's forcing the Jews to honor him as a god and worship Jupiter instead of Yahweh. And he's getting pissed at them. But why don't you guys? Why aren't you like the Syrians? And why aren't you like the Syrians? Just adopt our customs and they equate Baal with Jupiter and they just do what we want to do. And why can't you just do that? And so the Jews are like, no, we have these traditions that they're given by Moses. We need to follow them. We'll honor you. We'll pray for you, but we're not going to worship you. You're not our God. Please just leave us alone. So he writes this letter to the embassy of Gaius, and he's not saying anything what you get from Justin or Clement or even worse, Augustine when the Christians have power. He's going, why can't Augustus, your father, your grandfather, who's the grandfather of Caligula through adoption, he was like Dionysus, where he gave the fruits to the world. He freed us from our bondage, and he was like Mercury, who was traveling east and west and giving the good news of peace in the Roman Empire. And he was like naming off all these guys. He was like Hercules, who was going around and defeating all the pirates that were all swamped all throughout the Mediterranean. And he cleared the seas of pirates and made it free for all trading and good prosperity again. And well, why can't you be like him? Why can't you be a good light-giving Apollo god like your grandfather? He's saying, and the point I'm trying to make is he's saying positive things about the gods. So when you see him talking about the daimons, he says they call them daimons, we call them angels or messengers, but they're all the same. Philo's message is there's nothing wrong with your system. Our system is no different. He's trying to level with them. But then you start to get to the Christians they start to view it differently, where the daimons are not messengers of the god. They are these beings who are tricking you into falling into traps and go to hell or whatever.
So do you think so the change from Philo to Justin Martyr would seem to be, it's just because it seems like Philo is almost trying to find some like kind of syncretic middle position in a way to like make sort of not make peace, but have some sort of like harmony, religious harmony. Exactly. Whereas when you take on this messianic religious position that Justin Martyr has, suddenly now you're in a totally different perspective where we have the truth, everyone else is wrong and evil, essentially. And I know that there is a sense in which you could say the ancient world, sort of provincial or cultic religions had that view. The Greeks certainly said nasty things about the Persian gods, but there wasn't this idea that, as you said earlier, they're not actually gods. And that's actually one of the things Justin Martyr says is like the beings that the Greeks account to be gods, the Greek pagans, are sort of like false gods. They're playing at being gods. They've tricked them. Yeah. They're lesser being. You get a story because of the fact that we have this logic of like angeloi or daimones as lesser beings, but still divine beings. But he's essentially saying like through the book of Enoch, they exceeded their rights and now they're trying to like trick you and manipulate you. And the funny thing is, again, to jump ahead and relate it to modern times, I remember hearing evangelical Christians even make this claim about like modern day religions like Hinduism, like straight up arguing like demons founded your religion.
Oh yeah, you see this on Twitter all the time, where
true.
A popular Christian account will share a painting of Shiva holding
or Kali.
heads, or Kali looking like this is clearly a demon, and that's in line with a lot of other Christian theologians in the past.
Right. Yeah. You can find plenty of like aggressive or even terrifying imagery in Christianity too, which is the funny thing. Like if they were to apply it to themselves, like the image of Jesus in Revelation with a sword coming out of his mouth and all sorts of like odd hallucinogenic, scenes of judgment and the apocalypse. I mean, I could see somebody who was outside of that tradition being like, that's demonic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is what a lot of the Gnostics thought, because the Gnostics are trying to use the framework of Plato and the philosophers as gods are good. They're righteous and they have virtue. So they don't go out and murder people, or they do. So they're going through the text. Marcion does this Marcion's reading the Old Testament and he's going, all right, when Moses got the laws, that might have been good. So that's the good one. But then in um, this particular chapter, Elijah is called Baldy, and God kills these children, these
Yeah,
young
like
kids.
42 of them, right?
Yeah, mauls these kids, and because they called him Baldy, he said that's the demiurge, that's something else.
Oh,
That's the evil.
interesting.
Yeah, and he actually Marcion thought there was two gods in the scriptures. The
Right.
ones that the one if you whenever there's like good virtue happening, that's Jesus's father. And then whenever there's another one happening, whenever there's other things happening like fire coming down and killing people, well that's the other god. That's the other demonic figure, the evil god. And
Right.
that's how you get this sort of ditheism in Marcion. But but again, it's inspired by the Platonic framework of that the God has to be good. So he's using that as like an order of operations, like PEMDAS, and his first order of operation is God is good. So if I'm going through the scriptures and God isn't good, that's not God.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting way to think about it because if you think about what some of the things Socrates says, or even Heraclitus, where they're upbraiding Homer and Hesiod for portraying the gods being jealous,
Right.
sleeping with human women, being envious.
Exactly.
They essentially say, or we mentioned Pythagoras earlier, where he said, because of the things they said about the gods, they're in the underworld now. I've
Yes.
been there, I've seen it, right?
And
But it's like,
this was so influential to later Platonists who adopt this mindset. And
mhm,
you get through the mouth of Socrates in the book Republic, book 2, where he says like we can't be teaching our children that Zeus goes out and our words Ganymede. That's not a virtuous god. The Stoics, by the way, also adopt this line of thinking. The Stoics rewrite Zeus completely as the logos. They call this is where we get the term. This is where we get the theological term logos in Platonism from. Plato doesn't use that word, but when Middle Platonism was started by Antiochus of Ascalon around 80 BC, and he merges Stoicism with Platonism, the old academy with Stoicism, and they call it the New Academy at the time. And Philo was a member of this school of
oh,
Middle
really?
Platonism, and they were going back into the Homeric text and rewriting everything, basically taking all the bad stuff out, the same way Marcion does in Christianity, and you get a rewritten Zeus who's pious, who's virtuous, who's good, who only does good things. He doesn't our word any people anymore. He
Right.
doesn't kill people anymore. He
Doesn't
just goes
transform
up.
into swans so he
Yeah,
can get
exactly. He
busy.
just does
Yeah.
good things. And that's the Zeus, the logos. And you can see how this becomes the framework that Philo adopts, that God is good. And there's parts in Philo where he does say good things about Zeus. I think he compares him to Yahweh as well as being similar or the same idea, something like that. But that might be a different author actually.
Yeah, and I think even it's funny, right? Because even like in the Renaissance writers, their conception of like Jove, who Jove is, and it seems way more in line with sort of like a predecessor or a forerunner of the Christian conception of God than the way
Yes.
Zeus is actually portrayed
Yeah, and this is
according
in
to
the
the Greek morality.
yes, and the Renaissance writers like Dante they think of Jove as the just God. They just use the word Jove as by Jove or and the muses are invoked in Dante. What is that? That's pagan. But
Yeah.
I think he uses the muses as a place for angels in a sense. It's a very he's like Christianizing paganism. He's like taking the pagan concepts and then writing it out as like a Christian version. Like he's like Christianizing the ancient pagan text.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would have to be, right? I mean, and I was reflecting on it earlier, even when you were talking about monism and how, especially in like the Eastern Orthodox Church today, they don't like literally think of them as like lesser divinities, but it's like there's one God, but you can also pray to saints. They're kind of doing that same function of like
The heroes.
they'll
Yeah.
intercede for you with the divine. They'll pass your prayers along. They're kind of serving that same function. So it's interesting that we still have, I mean, it's definitely monotheist at the end of the day, but like those elements from the old world don't just disappear. They still exist to some extent.
Yeah, they make they there's like reformations that happen, but you can see a clear evolution of these ideas, almost like in a single train of thought, like going past. Like there's there's not like this school ended and this school popped up out of thin air. Like you could see them all blending into each other. You could see Philo's ideas blending into Justin Martyr's ideas, and then Justin Martyr getting picked up by people like Augustine later on, and going a little more in that direction of angels versus demons, whereas Philo tried to make them all kind of one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So could we then, I guess, talk about Augustine, and
Yeah.
like that seems to be like the further intellectual development, because I mean, would you agree with this, that it seems like in St. Augustine we have the sort of like the first, I think, articulation of like basically what modern people understand by demons.
Yes, and actually, I just remembered something that I think is important getting there. Josephus, who's writing
Mm.
around the same time as the New Testament in the late between the 70s and 90s. He writes some stuff in the 70s, and then he writes another giant text around 96. He talks about how Solomon, when God gave powers to Solomon, and this is a direct quote from him, God also enabled him to learn the skill which expels demons. And he uses the word daimons in Greek,
Mm.
which is a science useful and sanative to men. And then he says, Josephus even says about Eleazar was found to be releasing people from demoniacal in the presence of Vespasian. This is something that happened in his time period that he saw. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because in the New Testament, Jesus expels demons from 7 demons from Mary Magdalene. This is important. I'm glad I remembered this before we moved on, because clearly this is a different idea now in Christianity.
So
But Josephus
is the
holds on to this idea.
term, like, what is the term that's used in the New Testament? I mean, I know originally. So yeah,
Daimon.
yeah, of course, I guess it would be, because the first one is the Septuagint, right?
Yes. And so, what a lot of scholars, when they look at this, they go, this is similar to what Socrates had, a daimon that was telling him to
Mm.
do things and telling him, like, warning him about things. Not necessarily, these daimons are not necessarily always evil, but in the case of like Jesus expelling demons, these demons were making Mary Magdalene do bad things, or they're
Right.
making, so when Josephus uses the term, oh, expelling demons, he's talking about like a certain level of daimons who are nefarious, who are attaching themselves to people and forcing them to do evil acts or whatnot. Maybe it's depression, maybe it's psychopathy. But that's how we would describe it today. We would
Right.
say this person's a psychopath. Back then, they would say he's got a demon. This guy's got like 7 demons, and he needed to be expelled. And they thought like these people would heal them from demons, but they were actually just like psychiatrists.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting bringing up, the daimon of Socrates, because that whole phenomenon that Socrates says he has a daimon that dissuades him from essentially speaking false. And Nietzsche had a really interesting comment on that, insofar as, he thought in the ordinary person, the intellect is sort of regulative and reactive, and your instincts are active. In Socrates, it's reversed. So his instinct, it's regulative. It's like his conscience. He's interpreting that as like Socrates' impulses, his conscience. That's his daimon. So it
Yeah.
leaps in to intercede and regulate. Whereas for Socrates, the intellect is where he's creative and active, which is like, in Nietzsche's view, a totally different thing from the Greek world and how they normally approach life. But it's interesting because that usage of the term daimon to kind of refer to some sort of, impulsive quality you have, or some sort of like drive you have, or some sort of inclination you have that you can't really explain, that you might not even be able to like account for rationally, or that even when you try to rationally suppress it or regulate it, it kind of leaps out again.
Yes.
That's eventually the way Goethe will use the term, like, and these German philosophers in the 1800s, again, in a sort of in a positive way yet again. But it's
Yeah.
interesting that they had this conception that, okay, that could be good or bad. It could be a sort of a nefarious spirit attaching to you. But in the case of Socrates, at least the Greeks thought, this, well, the later Greeks, the Platonists and Neoplatonists, because obviously the Athenians execute them. But Platonists think that was sort of Socrates. That was like a benevolent, like it gave him like a great power. It gave him a really
Yeah.
positive power. It made
You
him
know,
unafraid of death.
yeah. And so, real quick, I just want to show people the Greek where it talks about Mary Magdalene, just so
Yeah,
they can see it.
I'm super interested in this actually.
Yeah, it says right here, some women who had been cured of evil spirits and some in diseases. Mary Magdalene, who seven demons had come out, and there's your word daimonia. And if what's interesting about this word daimonia, if you add the words epsilon, upsilon in front of that, you get eudaimonia, which is Aristotle's highest level of virtue. It's you trying to attain eudaimonia, which means like good spirit or good demons.
Right.
Aristotle, this was central to his philosophy, was like the highest level of virtue would leads to what's called eudaimonia. And I don't know if you can interpret that as like you've attained a level of mindset where you are one with like a daimon, like a good daimon, which is the word
Yeah.
that word eps el in the beginning means well or good.
Well,
So
there's
this
also
doesn't have that.
there's the passage in really quick in Plato's Cratylus where Socrates says he gives a whole etymology for the word daimon, which I think scholars reject, but he associates the term with wisdom, and he says, therefore, a wise man and a good man is rightly called a demon. He means that
Yes,
as a good thing, right? And so it is like Socrates already he already has this conception that the life well lived and something like that is like demonic.
exactly, and that's very Gnostic too. And this is obviously taking from Platonism, the Middle Platonist, which by the way, that verse we just saw, that concept of daimons being controlling you is very Platonist. It's very it's Socrates. It comes from the idea of Socrates' daimon, for example.
Yeah.
So you can see the influence of Platonism on the Gospels there, but the Gnostics go even further with it. And they said when you attain levels of gnosis that are so high, like Jesus did, you can literally become divine. And that in fact, that's what you should be trying to do in your lifetime. You should be trying to gain gnosis to become divine. And that way, when you are divine, it's like Buddhism. You exit what's called metempsychosis. You stop getting reincarnated and you become like a singular being that's constant in the cosmos. You're immortal. Like
Right.
you're no longer to die is to get reincarnated. You're dead. You're a new person now. You have a new mind, wiped out your memory. But to keep your memory and not die, even if you go to another Elysium or something, you're divine at that point. You're living immortal. You're forever. So
Right.
that was the idea. But yes, you can see here by the time you get to the Gospels, they're looking at daimons as something that affects your mindset, which is
Right.
very Aristotelian if you think about it too. It's very Aristotelian and it's very Platonist.
Right. Well, and it's interesting that connection because of the fact that like when people talk today about like possession, like a demon's taken possession over you, it's interesting because when I did look up the etymology of daimon, it has to do with like apportionment and dividing things.
Yeah, yeah. Which
And
is where we
so,
get the word dia, which means through. Dia in Greek
right,
means through. Yeah.
right.
It's
And you
etymologically
combine that
connected
with
to that.
logos, so you get dialogos, dialogue.
Dialogos, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, dialogue, yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it's like it seems to me the understanding that I have of that is that the daimones, the demons, they assign everyone their portion according to their how good or bad their life is. But there's also this idea of like dividing or apportioning lands and the demon being sort of like connected to a certain place or a certain person. And so there's always this idea of like it being attached to you or to like dwelling on ancestral lands or something like that. And it's one of the things I love about like archaic Greek religion. That's
Mm,
just so cool that
yes.
every family's land has their ancestral spirits. The city has its ancestral spirits or its heroes that go way back, and then they're like trying to steal relics from each other. Like the Spartans think if we can get the bones of Theseus, he'll actually protect our city and not their city.
The Romans do the same thing in right around 200, 204 BCE. They are told by an oracle, this through the Sibylline oracles, that if they go to Phrygia, which Troy used to be, they can go, which is their bloodline. They're told, go and get your ancestral Trojan uh, statue of the goddess Cybele, and bring it back to Rome and set it up with a temple and give her honors and give her sacrifices, do all that, get a priesthood, all that stuff. And if you do that, you'll conquer the whole world. They're
Wow.
told this,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they do this. They go,
Right,
they
right.
go there, and they get the statue, and they bring it to Rome, and they end up conquering the whole world. Now you could say, well, they just were. This is just a coincidence, whatever you want to say. The point is, this gave, well, maybe it gave them the confidence to go conquer the whole world. Maybe they thought, maybe this is the whole point of divination and the whole point of sacrifice is this. It's to set something in your mindset to do it. It's like to make
Right.
it. You have an oath now. This has to be done. The God wants us to conquer the world. We're going to go and conquer the whole Mediterranean, and we're going to be the kings of the world. Like that could be what happened. There could be a scientific and a spiritual way to look at this. You know?
Yeah, I think we talked about it last time, but Machiavelli kind of makes that point in talking about Livy, is
These
how,
discourses of Livy. Yes,
yeah, the
yes,
Romans used prophecy to sort of like the effect, the psychological effect it would have on the soldiers and things like that, which
yeah.
it's very hard to argue with that, honestly.
He almost laments in that same text. He's lamenting the current status of religion, and he's like, I don't even know if people really believe in this stuff as much anymore. It's more they just go to church because of whatever. He's like, but in the Roman Republic days, the religion was so grandeur, and everyone believed in the sacrifices, and that had an effect, and it was real.
Right.
That's why I love that text. By the way, he's so right about that. I agree with that.
Yeah, it's also, I think, hugely influential on Nietzsche, and just like the way he compares Christianity and like the sentiments that are created in you through Christianity versus the Roman pagan religion. And, just he's like, our religion emphasizes humility. It emphasizes sort of like eschewing fame and all these honors and all these things. And so you're going to get like just a very different, like sort of emotional palette that you're kind of like
Yes.
inculcating into people that's going to
It's a
affect their
different
whole view of the
shepherd.
world.
It's a different shepherd leading the sheep into a different direction, and you get a different result of society through Christianity. Whereas the pagan priest are a different kind of shepherd leading a different kind of animal to a different type of location. Maybe these are bulls. Maybe these are, or goats rather than sheep. I don't know. That's one way to look at it. However, you mentioned something, and I know we're going to get to Augustine, but this is important. You mentioned the archaic Homeric era of how people thought about the divine, and there's something so fascinating that when I'm reading Homer and I'm reading Hesiod, and the way the gods interact with humans is through emotions. It's like when people are lusting, that's Eros or Aphrodite that forces them to think this way. They are literally in tune with the gods. Every emotion, every thought, everything they do is the gods. When they win a victory in war, the gods did it. When they get hungry, the gods did it. When they want to go out and hook up with the girl, the gods did it. It's they thought of the divine as through our emotions and thoughts. That's how we interact with the gods. And even drugs can affect this. Different
Mm.
substances like the Eleusinian mysteries would literally give you contact with these gods because you're feeling a certain way, and the gods are now entering you and giving you these feelings. And so everything that happened in the archaic world was like the muses, like they're inspiring all the actions on earth was to them. Today, people think we're the ones who get credit for these things. You credit the doctor who saved you. You don't credit the gods unless you're a Christian. But that's how the ancients thought. It's almost like a proto-daimonic theology, but it's just the gods that are doing everything. Eros just struck me. Now I'm in love with this girl. That's how they thought about everything in the world.
Right. It's like anything. The way I tend to think about it is because I was trying to like really understand this of like what is this working principle of personification in the Greek world, and it seems like everything that exceeds the human will, or that the human will seems subject to. So the external world can be full of gods, nature. The Greeks are terrified of nature, So it's like Nietzsche's always making fun of like the Rousseauian romantics and like this vision of holy Mother Nature and everything that we have now. He basically says only a romantic age would ever think that. It's people who have basically feel like they're kind of crushed in the rising industrial world, and the society we're living in now, they look back to, oh, it must have been great during nature. The Greeks are looking at nature's full of gods, but it could be like really terrible to, the god Pan is supposed to, the term panic, it's supposed to be a terrifying experience to encounter. Because, if you think about a walk in the woods today versus a walk in the woods in 200 BC, it's a very different sort of experience, the sense of your safety. But then it also applies to emotions, as you're saying, like if anger overtakes you and
Yeah.
you like lose yourself. And Socrates talks about that divine madness. The idea of, he says there's like 4 different types of divine madness, and it's that there's way that where people go out of their minds. He even says poetry, when people are reciting poetry or writing poems, it's the muse working through them. And he says they're the same as Corybantian revelers or the Pythia, because a god is basically speaking through them and working through them. And Julian Jaynes had an interesting theory about that. He have you ever heard of his work?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, where he basically thinks that our the hemispheres of our brains didn't communicate in the same way. There was like a transformation of consciousness happening in the early days of civilization, and that he thinks people actually heard like the more emotional side of their cognition, experienced it as like a foreign voice, or like when you have like a voice in your head, or like you're reading or whatever. Like he thought that they weren't able to distinguish between, that's like a voice within me that's actually coming from outside. I don't know if that's actually true, but it's a really interesting theory. It at least maps on somewhat to how they seem to experience their emotions.
Yeah, and what's funny is that if you went back to the ancient Homeric Iron Age or late Bronze Age, and you said the gods aren't real, your emotions are mental, like your emotions are like some physical chemical imbalance going on, and they would just look at you like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? When I fell in love with my wife, Eros, obviously, like I literally felt the presence of Aphrodite or Eros when I fell in love, or when I was enraged because the tribe came and robbed us and they raided us. Mars or Ares entered through me, and I became a warrior, and I went berserk, and I went and fought back, and we defeated them. Ares helped me. I didn't do that. That's how they thought.
Yeah.
That's how they thought of things. There was no way you would convince them that the gods didn't exist, because they felt it. They witnessed it. They knew the god. This is what they just knew, and all these emotions that happened to them was the gods. So they didn't even fathom atheism until philosophers came along with their skepticism, and
Right.
that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think they might say rightly, like, how does your explanation, this is a chemical imbalance, actually do anything more for me, or how does that explain anything better than
Yeah, exactly.
Eros took hold of you?
That was the point I'm making. They would say, you're talking about these chemical imbalances. That's the gods doing that. The
Right.
gods are the ones making the chemical imbalances. Duh. And you're just like, okay, all right, I guess
Yeah.
so. But you know what? I thought about something too, right before we get to this idea of demons. I think there's another thing that inspires evil, demonic, horn demons. The idea of horn demons. And I have a lot of thoughts on this. Like, how do demons end up becoming shaggy goats? And there's actually a verse in the Old Testament, and let me share my screen, that gets mistranslated. And the Greek might be the reason why we think of demons as horned goats. So in Isaiah 13, verse 21, I'll just read the translation real quick. Desert creatures will lie there. Jackals will fill her houses. Owls will dwell. And there will be wild goats will leap about. That's a correct translation. However, the owls is interesting because it actually uses the term what is it called? There's a goddess in Mesopotamia who's the screeching owl. Hold on, let me look this up. I want to get this right. Screeching owl goddess. Lilith. Okay.
Oh.
So this right here, if I can find where it says, I know a little, I can read Hebrew, so I can find where it says Lilith. And no, this might be lined up incorrectly. That's probably what happened here. This is the wrong. The Hebrew doesn't always line up correctly with the Greek, so I think it's not the right passage here because I don't see Serum or Lilith here. Hang on, let me find the Lilith in Isaiah. Isaiah 34:14. So that would be up here in the Hebrew, where it actually uses the term Lilith.
I think it's 13.
Is it 13? Oh, is it?
I think it said 13.
Right. Isaiah 30 of the 34:14.
Oh,
am I,
14.
Am I in
sorry,
34?
sorry.
Okay, I'll just, you know what? I'll switch it over to the to the other this cross Bible. It gets unaligned when you try to make the Greek, English, and Hebrew. You end up getting the wrong verses in Hebrew. That's why I can't find it. So let me just real quick before I get to the Greek, I'm gonna put this aside for a second. And I'm gonna share one more screen real quick. I'm gonna go to this one where it actually says, "In the wild beast of the desert, the satyr shall cry to his fellow. The screech owl shall also rise." That's one of the translations. But there are other translations where it says Lilith. That's the word in Hebrew, by the way.
Oh yeah, I see it down there where they say goat demon.
Yes.
Night monster.
Okay.
Wow,
So
all sorts of different ways.
This is based on the Hebrew. The word Lilith can be translated as screech owl or Lilith, or just keep it the noun, proper noun. Lilith, who's considered to be a demonic figure in Judeo-Christianity, who is like connected to Eve, but also a different figure altogether. And it's also a Mesopotamian goddess, Lilith.
Right. So that also refers to like apocrypha, right? Where it's like Lilith. It's the idea she was like the first Eve, who's kind of like the failed Eve.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one that exactly the first Eve, the failed Eve. But this is Isaiah. Isaiah literally calls in the Hebrew version of Isaiah, whoever wrote this actually says Lilith is dwelling in the desert with these serum. And let me just go back to, well, I'll just keep this right here. The word serum in Hebrew means satyr or goat or hairy goat figure. It could be a satyr or a hairy goat.
Right.
Okay. So let me just go back. Now I want to show you the Greek. Now this is even more. This is where the demon thing comes in, because the translators, where am I? Okay, share my screen. The translators of the Septuagint, when they came across this passage, and this is in verse 21 for the Greek side, they actually translated as daimonia, and demons daimons are dwelling in the desert. So
instead of satyrs.
Instead of satyrs or wild goats in this English version, they translate the word. They didn't know what to do with it. They're like, what the hell is this serum thing? They didn't know what to do with it. And they're just trying to pull context from this. They're going, well, there's all these figures and something's going on here. There's screeching owls and maybe there's daimons in there. Maybe they're just they're daimons. They just translated as daimon. No one knows why. It's hotly debated why they translated serum as daimons. No one really knows. However,
oh well, I know, Neal. It's because the devil literally has horns and hooves.
Exactly,
and it's real.
Exactly, but here's the thing:
they knew it.
Christianity does not come out of the Hebrew tradition. Christianity comes out of the Greek tradition. So when Christians are reading their Old Testament, remember, they don't have the English translations we have today. They're not reading it as wild goats. They're not reading Hebrew either. So when
do you know what the King James says?
The King James uses Lilith. Good question. Let's look that up real quick. King James, the beast of the here. I'll share it so people can see it. So people can see. Here it is, KJV. The wild beasts of the desert also shall meet with wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow, and the screech owl also shall rest there and find. And see, notice it's a female screech owl, and find herself a place of rest.
Interesting. So they say satyrs. So
they
like
say
that.
Satyr. They
Yes.
translated it correctly. The King James people
Right.
translated the word serum correctly, but they took Lilith out, which I think is interesting. I think you would think the King James people would be more inclined to keep Lilith in there, but whatever.
Right.
That's what they
Yeah.
did. And so, okay, so the point I'm making is the Greek tradition, the Orthodox Greek tradition, what they're reading is demons are in the desert. And and so when they're also when these traditions start to mix together, when other people are saying, well, there's another translation where it's a satyr, or this one says it's a serum, they're putting it together. This is my theory. This is like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
No,
have a source that says this, but
that
I
makes
think
sense
they're
to me.
saying, oh, the demons are satyrs.
Mhm.
So I think that might be something to do with it. Also, one more thing on that. Pan. Pan is like the antithesis to all that is Judeo-Christian. His name means all. So he's
Mhm.
the opposite of the one. He's the all. He's also the rustic god of the countryside. Whereas Christianity is the civilized, educated, librarian religion of textual criticism and all this stuff. Whereas the pagans, literally, he's actually called
Right.
paganus. He's actually called paganus as one of his epithets in Latin. He's the rustic pan, paganus pan. So he's the pagan god. So it makes a lot of sense to me, and he's also a wild god of sex and debauchery and all that stuff. So it actually makes sense to me that he becomes the central image of everything demonic of
Yeah.
paganism.
And have you heard the story? I'm sure you have. I heard it actually first from Carl Jung, where he was saying that in basically right around the time when either Jesus was born or when he was crucified, I'm not exactly sure. There were sailors who were passing by this island who overheard. They
Yeah.
basically show up and report that they've overheard these laments from this wild cults out on this island somewhere, where they say the great god Pan is dead. And
Yes.
Carl Jung basically saw that as like archetypally symbolic. That basically, with the rise of Christianity, it's like the defeat of Pan. But it's just interesting that whether or not that's true or not, if we just take it as true for the sake of argument, that essentially marks out that age. The pagan age is like the age of Pan. So
It
Pan
is.
becomes like the symbol of that whole era that encompasses so many different cults and religions and beliefs. But it's essentially this panic idea versus the Christian idea. And I always thought that was an amazing
It is.
story.
It's very exactly.
And
It's very
Jung ties
go
it to
ahead.
Nietzsche, just to say really quick, because he says essentially Nietzsche saying God is dead, the Christian God is dead, is like a repetition of that whole thing of him saying the Christian era is now coming to an end. Now we're going to have a new era.
Yeah, and I've pulled it up. He says this is Plutarch's on the abelescence of oracles, or failure of oracles. And he says one of the last in his time, one of the last oracles that was ever uttered by Apollo, or no,
Mm.
it was someone else who said it, but I think it was an oracle or something. Here it is, right here. I'll just read it. It says, "As for the death of much beings, I've heard the words of a man who was not a fool or an impostor, the father of Emilianus, the orator, to whom some of you have listened, was Epitherus, who lived in our town, was teacher in grammar. He said that once upon a time, in making a voyage to Italy, he embarked on a ship carrying a freight of many passengers. It was already evening when, near Echidna's islands, the wind dropped and the ship drifted near Paxi. Almost everybody was awake, and good many had not finished their after dinner wine. Suddenly, from the island of Paxi, a voice was heard, someone loudly calling Themis, as they were amazed. Themis was an Egyptian pilot, not known by name even to many on board. Twice he was called and made no reply. But the third time he answered, and the caller, raising his voice, said, "When you come opposite of Pelotes, announce, the great god Pan is dead." On hearing all of this, Epitherus was astounded and reasoned among themselves whether it be to carry out the order or to refuse to meddle and let the matter go. Under the circumstances, Themis made up his mind that if there should be a breeze, he should sail past and keep quiet. But okay, you get the point. There is this person. Oh, here it is again. He says, Themis from stern, looking forward toward the island, said the words he had heard. The great god Pan is dead. Even before he had finished the cry of lamentation, not one person, but many, mingled with exclamations of amazement. So, but you're right. People interpreted this as this is an early second century text. So it's after the Gospels are written. And it's people are interpreted this as like the beginning of the end of paganism. The timing was just so perfectly right after the time of the Gospels. All of a sudden, there's this oracle. There's this right around this guy saying Pan is dead. He's like the like you said, he's the image of paganism. He's the old rustic polytheism symbol, and he's dead. And so yeah, I
And
think
it's amazing it comes through an
interesting.
oracle, which is a pagan practice, you know? There's like some kind of irony there that I don't know if I can articulate.
It is. It's almost like the pagan polytheistic tradition merging with the Judeo-Christian, and they're agreeing on some sort of history that happened.
Right.
Like God, Pan is dead, and now Christianity is going to take over and become the dominant thing. Or that's kind of how people interpreted it in a lot of these commentaries on that text.
Yeah, and it's I mean, I think it said, I saw when you were screen sharing, it's like the story spreads throughout Rome like immediately.
Yeah.
As soon as they make landing in Rome, people are already hearing this and like talking about it. And if I mean, I don't think the story itself was supposed to be from the second century, but if it's a second century text, I would imagine by that time they're already seeing Christianity starting to like spread around. But it,
Yeah, that's a good question. When does Plutarch say this took place? Because this could have been early. He could have been talking about a story that happened in the first century.
right.
That's a good question. I wonder when. Actually, I have no idea. But yeah, you might be right. It might have been because I don't know if you heard this. You ever heard of a band called the Waterboys?
No.
I wonder if I can play a clip, or maybe you would get. What do you think it might get like clipped or?
Um, I try not to mess around with YouTube on that.
Yeah, let's not. Well, okay. So there's a song by the Water. I can just show the lyrics.
Yeah,
Water
perfect,
Boys,
perfect.
Water Boys, Pan is dead. They wrote a
Oh,
song. It's a
interesting.
really good song. Really good song, by the way. They almost sound like
I guess
Billy.
punk rock.
No, it's more of like a Billy Joel kind of sound going on. Like
Oh, okay.
it's
All right.
I like it though. Let me find the lyrics. I listened to this when I was in Greece, by the way, and I was in Arcadia. We were listening to this song and drinking, and that's how I found it. The people in Arcadia showed it to me. They're like, "You know where the Water Boys is?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "They're like you're an English speaker. You don't know this song?" They're pissed. But it says the lyrics go. It's by the Return of Pan. It's called by the Water Boys, and he says, "I stood up on the balcony with my brand new bride. The clink of bells came drifting down the mountainside. When in our sight something moved, lightning eyed and cloven hooved. The great god Pan is alive." He switches it up from dead to alive. And he says, "He moves among the modern world in disguise. It's possible to look in his immortal eyes. He's like a man you'd meet any place until you recognize that ancient face. The great god Pan is alive." And this is the really good verse right here that I wanted you to see. "At sea on a ship in a thunderstorm, on the very night that Christ was born." So he's
Oh,
not placing
interesting.
it,
Yeah.
he's not placing this in the Plutarch's time period. He's saying this is on the very night when Christ was born. A sailor heard from overhead a mighty voice cry, "Pan is dead. So follow Christ as best you can. Pan is dead. Long live Pan." And then he says, "From Arcadia to the stone fields of Inshir, some say gods are just a myth, but guess who I've been dancing with? The great god Pan is alive." I love this song, by the way. You should check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to check that out. That's super
Yeah.
cool. It's also interesting too because there was a really famous horror story or like weird fiction story by Arthur Machen called The Great God Pan. And in that story, it's I think it really reflected like the Victorian attitude where they were like, it's like the Great God Pan is alive. That's horrifying. Basically, he's still out there in the woods. He's like the monster of the story in a way. But
Wow, that's interesting. I love that. Yeah, he's still playing his flute out there in the wilderness. He's never,
yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah, it's
But
super
he
cool.
represents, but I think that has a lot to do with the image of demons in late medieval, early modern, even today. People depict demons like Pan. When you see demons in movies, they have horns and they have cloven feet. And I think that has to do with who Pan is. It might have something to do with Isaiah, like I said. Maybe that's just a coincidence. But ultimately, people thought of this rustic, out there drinking and having escapades with women, and there's even pictures of here. Let me show you something real quick. I think it's in Pan's Wikipedia
Well, and I have no
page.
doubt it probably comes from Isaiah because, as I'm sure you know, with like the whole Lucifer thing, right? That
Yes,
Christians need so little. They need so little with so little context to extrapolate like a whole like
that's
interpretive
another
story.
that's another mistranslation that became central.
Yeah,
Like when you think of Lucifer, you're like, Lucifer is the devil. Why? What text are you talking about? And they go, Isaiah 14. Lucifer fell like a lightning. And that's not what he says. If you actually read the original,
right.
if you can read the original, if you check the Hebrew, it says Hillel ben Shakor. It says the king of Babylon. Sing this taunt to the king of Babylon. You were so high like Hillel ben Shakor, which means the shining bright star in the sky. You were so high like a shining bright star. And then you fell like lightning. So think about what he's saying. He's not saying anything's wrong or evil about that shining bright star. He's saying that's the high point that you should be. That's
That's the
good.
good. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and the morning star that's associated with Venus
Yeah, because
and
it
with
gets translated in the Septuagint. Once again, the Greek is where is where Christian comes from, not the Hebrew. The Septuagint translators, when they came across this verse in Isaiah, they translated it as Eosphorus, Dawnbringer, or Lucifer in Latin. And this is what Jerome takes the Greek version and he translated it as Lucifer. So it
right,
goes from Hebrew Hillel ben Shakor to Eosphorus or Eosphorus to Lucifer, and then but the funny thing is they're still reading it wrong.
right,
Even if you take the Latin version where it's literally Lucifer, you were so high like Lucifer, and now you fell like lightning. What does that have to do with Lucifer being evil? And it's
right.
not
Well,
even Satan. It's not nothing to do with Satan at all.
it's never associated. Yeah, with like Satan the accuser, like the figure that we see also very few times. I mean, arguably the snake. I don't believe the snake is even supposed to be
It's not.
Satan.
It's not.
Which I'm
It's a
sure we're
different
probably
figure.
on the same
But
page as.
but
But yeah,
Christians in Revelation, they say it is. In Revelation, they go that ancient serpent called the devil. So they just flat out assert that the serpent is the devil. However, I don't realize this is a contradiction because the serpent in Adam and Eve in the garden is the beginning of time. Job is in the distant past, maybe Persian period, maybe who knows, maybe it's a Bronze Age. They don't tell you when it happened. It's very vague on when the story of Job happened. But Job did not happen before Adam and Eve sinned. So
right,
you're telling me that the angel or the devil, who's the serpent, gets cast out of heaven, and then he comes back later and he's allowed to hang out with God and make these bets about, hey, God, what's going on? I'm just hanging out. What are you doing? Hey, the one I just cast out thousands of years ago, how are you doing? What's going on with Job? It doesn't make
right.
any sense. It makes
Well,
no sense.
the other thing that doesn't make sense about the devil is the snake thing is that it's like very clear, right? Like a lot of these especially Bronze Age texts are like trying to account for okay, why I know there's a specific term for this in religious texts. I don't it doesn't come to mind, but trying to account for like why is everything in the natural world the way it is. And so God is like, I'm going to punish snakes. You're going to crawl on your belly and eat dust. And so why would that be if that's actually the devil? Why would that be a punishment on snakes? Why are all these creatures of snakes? It's like it seems to me much more logical to think this is literally an account of like thinking back in old sort of mythological roots of religion, ancient mythology of the snake is tricky. He's a deceitful
Yeah.
kind of like sneaky being. And
He's a
that like
craftsman.
for that he's punished. That's why he has to like slither on the ground.
Yeah,
And
he's crafty too. Yeah.
right.
Which
But
might have some that might have had some connection with demiurge being evil, craftsman, crafty, the serpent, that type of thing.
right. Yeah, absolutely.
But
Well, do we
but
want to get on
actually,
to Oh,
yeah,
sorry, go.
I just want to show you one more thing with Pan. So when these are all Hellenistic images, statues of Pan, And you can see why Christians are like appalled by stuff like this. Like this, for example, I don't even got to explain why that
Right.
might be, you know. And then this one right here, I think, yeah, like that, like bestiality, like okay, like
Oh, wow.
so. So I get it. I get the interpretation of demons and satyrs and Pan sort of melting together in a Christian theologian sense. I get it. So I just thought I'd throw that nuance in there because Pan is not evil
Yeah,
in Greek mythology.
right. It's sort of like all the gods in a way, right? It's not like Ares or Eros are evil, but it could be like catastrophic, or it could be a source of like fear, or again, like with panic. But yeah, I think they just had a totally different conception of the divinity. Going back to what we were saying earlier, before this idea of God is good, he's absolutely good in all things that we get, that with Platonism. Prior to that, I think they had a very more neutral conception of the divine in a way. But yeah, I mean, I could definitely see it. That's what you always think of. Yeah, when you think of devils,
Yeah,
it's the horns, it's the hooves. Yeah,
it becomes like embedded in our brains. That's how it is. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, do we want to get on to Augustine?
Yeah, because Augustine is sort of like the clearest theologian that we can look at where now the daimons are just evil. They're not. He does actually he does mention the demon of Socrates. He does he talks first, he
Yeah.
talks about Apuleius, and he goes through Apuleius's theology. And he says, yeah, I can actually just kind of pull it up real quick just to show. Um, this is from City of God, I think book 8, where he's Apuleius the Platonist, the character of demons, and he says they are liable to some emotional disturbances as human beings, as we just mentioned before. The emotional disturbances being demons. This is where he's getting it from. This is very, very biblical, very Christian. And Apuleius asserts that gods are themselves animals or living beings, which he assigns to species. And he kind of goes through like what these things can do and what their ideas are. People can pause it and read that. And but then he eventually gets into Socrates, and he says, the god of Socrates, or in a fact that he prepared his book, the god of Socrates, Apuleius wrote this, the god of Socrates, where in the line of his own discussion, he makes a carefully copious argued distinction between gods and demons. He ought to have called it the demon of Socrates. However, and this is people actually took this and translated it that way. Now we call it the demon of Socrates. He has preferred to make this point an actual discussion rather than his title. The fact is a result of a healthy doctrine which has shone upon the world of men. Mankind in general has conceived a horror of the very name of demon, so that anyone reading the title, The Demon of Socrates, before studying the discussion in which Apuleius seeks to establish the excellence of demons, would conclude that Socrates was by no means a normal human being. And then he goes, but what it is that Apuleius himself has found to praise in demons, apart from the subtlety and stability of their bodies and elevation of their abode, as their morality in the
Hmm.
general remarks he makes about demons as a whole. He has nothing good to say about them, but a great deal of ill. In fact, one who has read the book can no longer be astonished that these demons wish the obscenities of the stage to have a place among divine ceremonies, and that while eager to be accounted gods, they could find pleasure in the scandal of the deities, and that everything in the sacred rites which arouses laughter or disgust by reason of its celebration of obscenity or its degraded barbarity, and very much in their taste. So he almost acknowledges the idea of demons can be good, and then he just sort of flips it on its head and goes, "But he's wrong.
Right,
They're
right,
ill-willed. They want you to worship them. They want to be called gods, and they're tricking you." He goes right back to that
right.
classic Justin Martyr type of demon thing.
Well, and it seems like with what Apuleius, like I get the sense that Apuleius is sort of trying to, like, Augustine's like calling him out. He's saying,
Yes,
okay, you made this distinction, but you don't want to necessarily say Socrates had a demon, because now we all understand with this healthy doctrine, because Christ is the physician, right? He's coming in to heal us from sin and all that. Now we have this healthy doctrine. We know what demons are, but it's almost like he's calling him out, like, okay, let's not praise Socrates for this,
exactly,
because he's not like a normal guy. He was possessed,
exactly.
and all of their rights. Look at how immoral they are.
Exactly. He totally rejects this idea that daimons can be leading us to good things, and he's just saying, I reject that whole premise. Demons are bad. Period. If they're not messengers of the one true God, I don't want any part of them. That's what Augustine is laying out in his
Right.
text. And
And
yeah, that
Augustine is
becomes
still, he's not only, it's like out of all the people we've talked about, Augustine's still influential. There's not that many people reading Philo of Alexandria or even Flavius Josephus, if they're not like apologists, looking for things confirming Jesus, which is kind of funny because if I recall, Josephus is like a Pharisaic Jew, so a lot of the
yeah,
things they say are in there. He would never say. But
right.
a lot of this is more obscure, but Augustine, City of God, and Confessions,
Huge,
huge
especially
influence on
Latin
philosophy,
Christianity. Yeah,
Latin
huge.
Christianity. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I guess I'd want to get like maybe your reaction to like how you think about this because we've talked about how they did, which I'm really glad you brought that in, the whole look of the satyrs and Lilith and all that. I didn't really think about that. The understanding I came to when I was kind of trying to understand how this turn happened, which we've walked through, is that because like the question kind of arises, right? There's a lot of different pagan religions that the Christians would have been aware of or surrounding them. There's probably all sorts of Celtic and Gallic religious beliefs or people in Syria or all these, and like those are mentioned, especially in the Old Testament. I mean, there's that passage where I think Ishtar is called like a false god or something like that in the Old Testament, if I recall correctly. But it's like I was really wondering, why is it in the common parlance today, somebody will say that's demonic or that's a demon, going back to this Greek word and not something from Persia or the Celtic world or something like that. And the understanding I kind of came to is that I think it's because of Constantine effectively being the one who, gives Christianity its power, its political power, represents the first like Christian regime over Rome. It seemed like the front lines of like the war on paganism happens in Greece,
Yeah.
where that's the sort of like the devil. Those are the demons they know, right? That are
Yes.
right around them. And
Yes.
it's like when they're looking for like the ready to hand example of like, okay, what are these false gods? What are these fallen angels? What form do they take? They look around and they're saying, oh, it's these people in the Temple of Apollo. It's these people here
Yeah.
and I guess, yeah, maybe we could talk for just a little bit about Constantine and about the persecutions and about sort of the Christian war on paganism, how
Yes.
that actually played out.
Well, it's interesting you brought up the Temple of Apollo. There's a text right here. It's the apocryphal New Testament Apocrypha, and there's actually 3 volumes. That's how much. This is how much Christian text there actually exists. In fact, let me just to give you a visual representation. Let me show you this right now. I have them all right here. Here's one, two, and where's the third one I have? Right here. Boom. This. These 3 books right here, gigantic, right? That's a lot of
Yeah.
text right there.
Yeah.
That's all apocrypha. It's
Oh, wow. All
only
apocrypha.
Christian, only Christian. None of this is canon. These are all texts written by Christians from the 2nd to 7th, maybe even some going to the 8th and 9th century AD. All that huge amount of text. That's just New Testament. If we look at Old Testament, we have
Well, right, because Book of Enoch is a
all
non-canonical Old
this.
Testament, right? Which we talked about
All Old
earlier. Oh,
Testament
wow.
pseudepigrapha. None of this is canon. All of it's non-canon, non-canonical. And then you get Gnostic stuff. This is all the Gnostic. This is a huge, thick book of Gnostic text. So much Judeo-Christian literature exists that most people don't know about.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because in a lot of these New Testament versions, the first 3 that I brought up, these 3, and in these stories, there's a common theme that I noticed, and one of them I have right now in the top of my mind in the book called Acts of John, which is 2 versions. There's a 3rd century version in Greek, and there's like a 7th century version, I think, in Latin. So there's like different. They have a lot of differences going on too. Somebody changed a lot of stuff, but in the both versions, they have John. It's backdating itself to the 1st century. It's John the apostle. not John the Baptist, John the Apostle.
Mm.
And the one who wrote Revelation, is supposedly the one who wrote the three letters of John, the one who's in the island of Patmos, writing to the seven
Right.
churches of Asia. Well, this guy's going around the Greek world, and one of the examples they give is he meets with these priests of Apollo, who are like, "What are you doing, dude? You're some like random exile from the Middle East. We don't want you here. What are you doing here?" And he says, "When I say the word, I will when I say the logos, like when I say the word, I will destroy your temple and there won't be a brick standing." And they're like, "This is all sorcery, dude. Get out of here." And then he does it. He speaks and the temple of Apollo is destroyed and it's
Wow.
no more. And there's not a brick laying and they're completely defeated. And they're all like repenting and, "Okay, fine. You're the true one." And it's like, there's like a superhero comic stories that are
Yeah.
being written about these great apostles doing these great magical feats. But the interesting the theme behind it is it's so anti-Greek. It's so
Mm.
anti-Greco-Roman culture, so anti-pagan. The good thing that he's doing is he's going out and destroying the temple. I mean, that temple was something that was sacred to people. That was people went there to worship for thousands of years, hundreds of years at least. There's a homily from Saint John Chrysostom where he's taunting, because he's living at a time, he's living right at the 370s, 380s, 390s. He's living right at the time where paganism is becoming illegal and the temples are being discontinued and they're not being funded anymore, and they're shutting down the Olympic Games that happened in 380 or 390. They shut down the Olympic Games, Theodosius's decree. They quenched the fire of Vesta in Rome. They shut down the Eleusinian mysteries. They shut down the Samothracian mysteries. The mysteries of Mithras gets disbanded. All this reformation is happening. And what is John Chrysostom doing? He's laughing about this in his homilies. And his teacher, who he learned philosophy from, was a pagan. And apparently he like taunted him as he was lamenting, all my culture is being destroyed. And John Chrysostom was like, "Good. It should have been destroyed a long time ago." And look, there was a mentality in Christianity that was, it was like, I guess I compare it to like how leftist, left wing educated liberals are. Like they want to kind of just like dismantle the patriarchy, dismantle the oppressive statues of Robert E. Lee or whatever. And this is kind of the mentality
Yeah.
that you see in these Christians, because they have this idea that these are all demons and we're worshiping the true good divine figure. And this is what they believed in.
There's something really interesting in the idea of John, like just speaking the temple into, like speaking the destruction of the temple with logos, pure logos, and then also the decree of Theodosius ending the Olympics and showing that division between, like, it's not like logos wasn't important in the ancient Greek world, but there's this more like holistic, like really embodied, like set of values, I guess you would say, where they really thought the human body, well, for one, that's how their divinities are portrayed, is in human form, and often beautiful human form.
Yes, like using the golden ratio to make a face, like mathematically perfect, beautiful, appealing to the eye, that type of thing.
Right. And then looking on like the perfection of the body. And that's one of the things Nietzsche says, is that the original sense of the term physician wasn't to heal the sick, it was to like create health. It's kind of like the opposite of the way we see it, where it's basically like the physicians were part of like they flourished wherever he says there was like gymnastic competitions or the Olympics, because they would tell the athletes like, this is how you optimize, essentially, right? That was like how at least in Nietzsche's account, how the profession of the physician comes about is getting people to optimize rather than I'm going to go around dealing with the sick and the weary, right? Now, who knows if that's exactly true, but that's definitely what the Greeks emphasized. And it definitely what like Pindar is talking about in all of his sort of like odes to the Olympic victors and everything. And so it's just interesting of like, we got to end these Olympic Games. And then when they go through and they're tearing down all these statues, a lot of the problem they have with the statues, well, for one, they're saying they're demons. So that's important. But furthermore, I think there's something about it that Like we've probably talked about this. That it went like somewhat viral, probably in the weirdo kind of circles we run in, where there were like Christians showing this statue of a goddess who they had sheared the face off, and then inscribed a cross into the sheared off face. So they basically like sliced off all of the features, and then it's just a cross. And I saw like modern day Christian evangelicals or whatever background they were, but people of that mindset, kind of coming out and say like, this is based, this is awesome. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, it seems like there was like rage at personifying the divine in a beautiful human form in a way that, and to where you're like, I have to destroy that, the resemblance to the human, and just put this symbol. And there's something about that of like the symbol, like, it's iconoclastic, even though it is a symbol. It's like it's not a likeness of a person. It's we're just using this to refer to this sort of like abstract idea. And
exactly.
Also, I mean, throughout a lot of the stuff I read, actually, I did want to ask you, for one, if you have any reaction to that, but also, I mean, how much do you really believe about the like the extent, because the pagans will write about how they were persecuted, right? And say like they turned our temples into brothels, they turned our temples into casinos, basically. They say they executed priests or even crucified them. And I've found this one source of Ammianus where he was even saying they set up death camps where they're making us convert and all that.
Oh yeah,
I've heard
and
that
there's a 7th century council, one of the councils in Trullo. This is a ecumenical council. This is not some random thing a few church fathers did. This is a big deal. This is up there with the Nicene Creed type deal.
Right.
Ecumenical Council of Trullo in the 7th century, 690s, I think it is. They first they said that there was no more Brumalia festivals going to happen because it's too pagan. Then there's another text in there where it says makes me laugh actually. And it's funny that I'm laughing. It's ironic. Like Bacchus just made me laugh because it literally says the frivolous laughing is now illegal for viticulturists. So if your profession is to make wine, you're into viticulture, and you would get caught frivolously laughing while you're doing your job, it was because you were honoring Bacchus.
Right.
Or maybe they thought Bacchus was entering you, and we can't have gods coming here. They need to be gone. We need to what's the word? To cast demons out.
Right.
And they did it through legalization, through law. They literally said no more frivolous laughing for making wine because that's Bacchus.
Right.
That's insane.
You need wine for your Christian rites. Jesus is also a wine god, but Jesus never laughs in the entire Gospels.
That's another thing that Augustine says. Augustine thinks that a good, virtuous person who's a Christian will be stoic. They have a face is always like this. Whereas demon worshippers are always laughing. They're always like, that's like they thought of that as a disgusting, evil trait.
Well, and like Augustine, he's saying, look at their rites. They provoke laughter. It's like a strike against it for him.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Augustine. Yeah. He thinks that the idea of people going around laughing and jumping around and having a good time, that was some sort of demonic influence. You should be contained and sober and stoic. That is the Christian way. Jesus would have said that. Like, that's what they thought. And it's funny because we think of laughter as good today because it's almost like we just intuitively know that laughing is good. But they actually tried to kind of police laughter in a sense. There's another source from the time of Julian the Apostate. He's writing a letter to Julian. His name is Mamertius. And Mamertius was like, Julian, I thank you for bringing us back our rights, because there was even a time not too long ago where we weren't even allowed to look up at the stars because the Christians thought we were doing astrology, and that's pagan. It's what he wrote. And I don't know, some people might doubt the truth, if that's really what happened, but I think there probably some truth to that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I actually learned this from your channel. I don't remember what conversation, but where there was a time where the Christians, the early Christians, were even saying, we don't even calculate birthdays. We're not interested in Jesus when he was born, because that's what pagans do. They look up at the stars and try to figure out when things happened. And we're not interested in any of that. The kingdom of heaven's here right now. It's done. We don't need to worry about it. And so I would totally believe that they would criminalize looking at the stars. But I guess I'm wondering because I've heard from some sources that the early Christian persecutions are a little exaggerated. Like the
Yep.
Christians' account of their martyrs. Do you think, like, what do you think about the pagans' account of like their priests getting executed or temples getting destroyed? Like, is there a grain of truth in both of these, and they probably both exaggerated? Do you think the
Maybe.
pagans actually have more of a case? Because it seems to me like,
The pagans have more of a case because we can see it in the archaeology. We know that they destroyed the temple of Serapis. We know they didn't
right.
just destroy temples; they repurposed them into churches. But that could be discontinued stuff like that. Maybe there's something like that. We know through reading their own decrees, so we don't have to even look at pagans and their testimony. The Christians themselves, in Theodosius's decrees, says that he was going to shut down the Olympics. He was going to shut down the Temple of Vesta, effective immediately. He tried to shut down the Eleusinian Mysteries in decree. They fought it. They just said no. They just totally went against the emperor and risked their lives. And the emperor, to his credit, he didn't go and send some of them to get killed. He just said, oh, whatever. But then, like 10 years later, a bunch of Celtic Gallic invaders came and sacked Eleusis, like right around. Still, I think it was during the reign of Theodosius still, and there was no defense to them. They just got sacked. And there are some scholars who think that there might have been the Romans might have like let them
inside
do it.
job.
Yeah, that might have been
Yeah.
because that happened before. That's happened many times.
Yeah, it's a false
the
flag.
Romans would literally let the Germanic tribes go and raid some city that's not being, they're not sending in taxes or something. This is something that could have happened.
I mean, that's literally mob logic, right? It's protection money. Like you're paying us to protect you, and if you're not paying your taxes, maybe we'll just let you get raided. That
Yeah.
makes perfect sense to me.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
and funny thing is that raid never didn't happen for 500 years since then. There was a raid in Eleusis during a very ancient period, but Athens was controlling. We know that they tried to stop it, but this idea, like, it's just funny how right after this decree happens, they get raided and something unprecedented happened. Like it's
Right.
it's a little sketchy. It's a little sketchy.
Yeah. Well, we've been going for almost 2 hours. Is it you cool to do like one final question?
Yeah, and I actually wanted to. You mentioned something about Iatros, the medicine or healer,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
physician, and I thought I just was looking this up as you were saying this because I was interested. I was like, that's a very interesting point that you just made. But if you look up the lexicon, there's this Pindar uses another term. I guess he calls it a metaphor for orges, which orgao. It's related to the word orgy, by the way, but this is a different
Oh,
usage of it.
interesting.
This is it literally can mean growing ripe for something. Isn't that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Pindar has a different, and that's exactly who Nietzsche references of like.
There you go.
because-
Yeah. So
yeah.
that's a true philologist right there. Where they go into the ancient text and they look at usages of a word and how it's used by different people. And as you just said, or this word was used as a metaphor for orgao, or to grow and growing ripe fruits or something like that. So
Yeah.
I just thought that was fascinating that you said that. I just learned something from that right there.
Yeah,
I
that
love Nietzsche.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Nietzsche's great, and he's. I'm trying to remember exactly where he said that. I think he says it in his lectures on the pre-Platonic philosophers, because there's all sorts of great stuff in there that's sort of like tangential to his point. But I highly recommend that to any of your listeners. Like, if they want to get into Nietzsche as a philologist, that's the work to go to. Birth of Tragedy is great too.
Yeah.
But that requires a lot of background. You got to read a lot of Greek tragedies. Whereas, like, if you just have an interest in philosophy and you want to see how he's engaging with like the pre-Socratics, he calls them pre-Platonics because he's doing a thing there where he's trying to say Plato or Socrates is more similar to the pre-Socratics than he is to Plato.
Yeah.
He's trying to make a division.
The Tragic Age of the Greeks is also a good one too.
Yeah, and a lot of that material comes from those lectures. But in the lectures, you'll get the and there's a volume published by Gregory Whitlock where you get a lot more of the philology. Like
I got to start reading that myself. I
Yeah,
should have been by now.
Oh, it's great. There's a long discourse on like the word for wise and wise man, and how Aristotle says we account these people to be useless because their knowledge can't be basically practically put to any good use. And that, it's like he's really getting into the weeds, and it's a really cool text. But I guess like the final question I wanted to ask, relating all this to the modern day, there, because we talked about it a little bit. People call things demonic. It's sort of a thing that they just throw out there. And I think a lot of the time, it's just when something's just creepy, or when it's like the uncanny valley, where something seems kind of human, but it's a little bit inhuman, so that, it like unnerves people or it upsets them in some way. Which is ironic, because we were just talking about the Greeks sort of like celebrate human images of the divine and all that. But I've heard people talk about this term like gin brain that people have these days, in terms of like the same way somebody like a medieval person in the Muslim world might see anything that happens scary or kind of unexplained, or something that they can't really make sense of, right? Just kind of becomes a jinn. It's like it's an evil spirit. And I see this today, where people will label things demonic because it's like, look at this guy, he's got like a creepy smile. Or like, I saw this one video on YouTube, man, where people were saying clowns, the Nephilim looked like clowns, and the entire argument seemed to be clowns are creepy. So that must have been what they look like. We're instinctually,
Yeah.
and they literally were looking at old pictures of like circuses, right? And saying, look at this picture of a clown. That's supposed to be for kids. That's demonic, was like the direct quote. And I just see that, I see that kind of thing a lot. It's almost something like you can't argue with, right? Because it's just like an emotional reaction.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know if that speaks to a specifically Christian way of looking at the world. I'm just wondering your thoughts on this.
Actually, it almost sounds it sounds like a Christian way of looking at the world, yes, but it almost sounds like it agrees with the pagan world, where you are inspired, divinely inspired through your through your instinct. So,
right.
like, you think things are beautiful because the gods made it beautiful, and that's why it's beautiful. But when something's creepy and off-putting, that's the gods telling you this. So there might be some sort of muse or some sort of angelic messenger telling us these things. Maybe that's what they think. That makes a lot of sense, though. I can see why people would, because what is the purpose of a daimon? It's to warn you not to go to certain places. It's to prevent you from your downfall. It's to help you, guide you in your world. So if you're getting that ick feeling about something, that's your daimon. That's your or an angel, a messenger.
Right. Well, it's almost ironic, right? Because it would be like the ancient Greeks would have said, the demonic is the thing that's warning you about that. That's actually your good protective spirit. Exactly. But now we're using the Christian language to refer to that same thing.
Yeah, because, and it's funny that you just reminded me, because there's a lot of in Greek mythology, especially in like Euripides and Aristophanes and the plays, when like Dionysus goes down into Hades, there are like what we would call demonic creatures down there. Like there's like I don't know, like creatures that are just like animalistic. They're not like, they're not having conversations with you. They're not sentient. And so there might have been a concept. They didn't call it demonic because they already had that word daimon. I wonder if they probably just described it the way that Christians later describe demons. So I think the idea the idea is always constant, but the way we use terminology to describe it is what changes.
Right. That's like H.P. Lovecraft says when he's got an essay on supernatural horror and literature. He says the most powerful emotion is fear, and the most powerful fear is fear of the unknown. And so it's like whatever is sort of like, that like we have like a really modern rationalistic way of approaching things these days, but there's still that X, like something that you can't quite account for. And that's like where it gets fixed with whatever the signifier we have, which most people, the only language they really have is demonic, something like that. But
it's become part of our vocabulary, even when we're not Christians. Like you can just even just like artists or films that are that's demonic. Like, why would you say it? It's just become part of our way of thinking about things.
Yeah, all of our ideas now, they have their roots in the ancient world. That's why I love talking to you, man.
And it also might be why we say daimonic to differentiate from demonic.
Yeah. Well, like I said, this whole thing for me started with Goethe, and he definitely has daimonish. He doesn't use the German word. Like, I don't think they really had a German word that was demonic, but it was like they had a word that was like diabolic, or like it was more like devilish or something like that. And he intentionally is not trying to invoke the devilish. He wants to invoke this idea of like what was in Socrates. That's, basically what he was trying to go back to.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been great, man. Do you have any new projects? Your film, all the stuff you did over there in Greece, the last time we talked, you were about to go over there. It looks awesome, everything you've done. I haven't is the full film out?
No, I am waiting. I have to wait a little bit because the person I interviewed is in a court case right now.
Right.
And
Okay.
He said I can release the stuff that I filmed with him, but he gave me some things that he had to take out because of the case. And I said, I'll wait for that. I said, how long for the case? He said, a few more months. And I said, I'll just wait for it.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for his case, and then hopefully I can include everything if he beats the case.
Yeah. I've just seen some of the clips of you over there talking. And
yeah, it's the guy who got arrested for building a temple of Pan, by the way. He got arrested. So he's fighting off a case that says that he's not allowed to build a temple because you can't have a religion without all this paperwork and all this stuff. But he's saying, no, it's not a temple that's public. It's my own personal property. And so he's actually from what I talked to his lawyer, they're going to beat the case, it seems like. But he doesn't want to put content out in the world, sort of making it seem like it's a temple while he's fighting a case saying it's just private property. Right. So I'm like, okay, because I really want to include this. It's a big part of my filming and my discussion with him. And I would hate to take all that out. And then 3 months later, he beats the case, and I could have had that in there. So I'm just going to wait a little bit. Everyone be patient, but it's coming out, though.
Awesome. Well, it's been good having you, man. I think we'll call it here.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Signing off.
You've just attained true gnosis.
If you enjoyed the Nietzsche podcast or found it helpful, you can visit us and support the show at patreon.com/untimely-reflections. The link is in the description. Or just share the show with any of your friends that you think might enjoy it or on social media. Thank you for your support.